Good morning, everybody. We are continuing on where we left off yesterday on the bottom of Tet Zion Amud Bet towards Yud Zion Amud Aleph. We were discussing about what is the maximal area that is allowed to be enclosed by the walls in order for you to still be able to properly live in the area without there being too wide of an area that would disqualify the whole region. Okay, so I'm screen sharing now. You'll see the diagram. So, right. So the question was we were talking about the maximal size, as well as the difference is in if there's a large gap in the middle, number of people. So, right. So, trying to base that time is the amount of area which you could plant a certain amount of grain in. To get a BAYT to get two out of it, and so that ends up being an area of 70 by 70, 70 a little by 70 and a little, which leaves 500 square 5,000 square amot. So that's that's this region over here. So then we said based on the number of people, it scales up, right? And it can keep getting larger and larger based on the number of people, as long as there's no empty space that's at least BAYT time. So now we're going to continue discussing how exactly does it scale. So in the case of the two dots onto Zion Amud Bet, we're going to Arsh of Nachman Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Yachid don't need low BAYT time, Shnaim don't need low BAYT time, Shlosha Nasu Shiara don't need lohen BAYT shesh. So Nachman, the name of Rabbi Shmuel. So one person gets BAYT time, then there's two, then he also gets to BAYT time, and if there's three, then become considered to be a caravan, and they get total 6. So Shavak Rabban Avada to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Wait, so does that mean that you don't follow the Chachamim, and now we're following Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda? So right, so what do you mean? Like that's not the way the numbers work. Let's try this again. Hadar Ukim Rabbi Nachman Amora Ale V'Darsh. So then Rabbi Nachman, got himself a Maturgamon, somebody to stand over him and help him explain it, like basically just repeat what he says louder so everyone can hear it better. The ancient version of a microphone, it was a person. So what you heard before was mistaken. This is what I meant to say. This is what the Chacham's opinion is. That Yachid don't need lo BAYT time, Shtaim don't lehen BAYT time, Shlosha nasu shiara. Not in the hand called sarka, right? So it's not that it goes 2, 4, 6, and then stops. Rather, it goes 2, then another 2, and then it's still 2, and then when you get to the size of when you get to many people, it's considered to be a caravan now. Then it's as much space as they could possibly need, right? Called sarkan. Right, so then let's say they had an insane amount of belongings, then they could have even larger areas used. Okay, now moving on to Zion Aleph, Reisher Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda of a Sefer Rabbanon. Wait, so that would mean that the middle of that statement we switch between the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda of the BAYT Satayim and that of the Rabbanon, which is that of the based on how much space you need. Yes, that's the case because his father follows Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why he's quoting. That's how he holds. Right, so he holds that hybrid shita. Amar Gidal Marav Shlosha b'chamesh Asurin b'sheva mutarin. So Rav Gidal said in the name of Rav that if there are 3 people, they can't carry in an area of 5 BAYT. B'sheva mutar, but in 7 they would be able to. Amrulay, Amrav, wait, did he really say that? That doesn't make sense. Amrulu, Oraita Nevi'e Uktived Amar Rav Hachi. He said to them, I swear by the Oraita of the Torah, Nevi'im, Nevi'ah is Nevi'im, Tuvim is Tuvim. He's swearing on Tanakh that this is what I heard Rav say. So Amar Rashi, my kasha, what's the problem? Right, so Rashi says, what's wrong? Maybe this is what he really said. maybe what the Midrash says that if the group of 3 needed 6, but accidentally ended up surrounding an area of 7 Beitza, that it's still permissible. But if they had only needed 5 and they accidentally made a perimeter around 7, and even the 5 that they're using, they can't do, because now you end up having an empty Beitza inside of the region, and that's a problem, right? So as I mentioned before, right in this diagram over here, right? So if this area here is Beit Chaim, and that's completely empty and unused, that's going to ruin the entirety of the whole of the enclosure that we're doing with our string walls. So okay. So that'd be the problem. So what the Beit just said is stated, as long as there's the Beit Chaim exposed. So what do I mean? Do we mean that there's nobody standing in that region? Not that somebody has to be constantly standing in each area, so that way there's no area that doesn't have a person. Rather, it can't be completely empty. The thing that determines it is whether there's a person. They're not a person, but things, right? Utensils. So now we're going to continue on with these cases. So now we're talking about how to deal with the certain number of people got a certain allowance of space. So now here's a new case. Shosha omeit echad. There were 3 people which made the Mashiach, and then 1 died. Or if there's 2 and another person that joins, now it's 3 people in the region, all happening on Shabbos. Rav Huna v'Rabbi Yitzchak Chad Amar Shabbat Goremet, Chad Amar during Gourmet. So they argue. They say, what determines the status of the area? One says that Shabbos determines it. So meaning as soon as at the outside of Shabbos you had enough people that even the person died is still fine. On the other hand, the other one says that the people determine it, which would mean that it can change even on Shabbos. Like if a third person shows up now, then that means that they can now have more space. So now we're going to try to figure out which opinion is which. This time, Rav Huna Hu Amar Shabbat Goremet. So we should conclude that Rav Huna is the one who says that it's caused by Shabbos. Why do we say that? Damarava, by Meirav Huna, by Meirav Yehuda. So once they ask the question of Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, Irev derech hapetach, fadistam hapetach, derech hacholam, fadistam hacholam mahu. Somebody made a area between two houses, and the only way to get in between the two is by way of, here we go, basically the only thing that connects the 2 regions is this area right here. Let's say you got 2 chaserot, and then the way that you're joining my rishus to another person's rishus, my next door neighbor, we don't share anything, but there's a little gap in our courtyard wall, right? So that's how we can say it's a joint region, because now we can both have access to each other's area. So that only works assuming that area of access is available. Similarly, by, let's say, if there's a window between the 2. Right, so this is when it's open, and then let's say wall fell down, or something like somebody dumped dirt there. I don't know why they've done that, but something like that happened. Maybe Beaver decided to build a dam there, or let's say by a window, similar concept. There was a window in the wall, and the window got filled in. Right, so if that happens, so what's the case? So Amarli Shabbat Hoil Hutra this time. He says since it's already Shabbos, that means since it was allowed on Shabbos, it still remains allowed on Shabbos, and that means that once we have permissibility to use it on Shabbos, like when Shabbos starts, meaning that Shabbos go around it, and that's the way you should conclude that Rav Huna holds that. So we'll look not so fast. Lema Rav Huna Rabbi Yitzchak beplukta Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda kamiplugi. So maybe Rav Huna and Rav Yitzchak are arguing about the opinions of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. So what do we mean by that? So maybe it has nothing to do with Shabbat Goran. Maybe something else. Now, I stated in the Mishnah, if you had a chatzer that had breaches on both ends of it, similarly, if you had a house and two of its walls broke down, So that would be okay. Here we go. So here's that. So show the. So we're saying, but here's what we say. We don't mean that two walls fell down. We're saying that where this is, let's say the corners, which counts as two sides, right? Because like, right? Because if walls on both sides would fell down, you probably don't have a house anymore. It's probably all going to fall down. So that would okay. So that's what we're talking about. And similarly, if you had a mavoish you'd already fixed by putting a korah or a lechi or two lechis, or like depending on the way you fix it, however you fix it, and somebody comes along and takes whatever you have made it a valid area to carry. Utarin loto Shabbat, v'asurin loti lavot. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that even if the air falls down, the wall falls down, if the lechi and the korah disappear, it's fine as long like if any of these halachic walls fall down, it's fine for that Shabbos. But in the future, it's no good. You have to fix it. Rabbi Yossi Omer, imutarin loto Shabbat mutarin lavo, v'masurin loti lavo, asurin loto Shabbat. Rabbi Yossi says no, as in if it's good now, then it's always good. But if it's no good now, then it's never going to be good again. I mean, sorry, if it's going to be good, bad in the future, like, then if next Shabbos I can't rely on the way that my walls are set up, the next week I also can't rely on it. Like, there's none of this, like, oh, Shabbos came in and it's fine. It's like, look at my walls. Are my walls there? If the answer is yes, great. If not, then we got a problem. So, Lemar Huna, Damak Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yitzchak, Damak Rabbi Yossi. So let's do a straight, let's line them up. So Rav Huna then holds Rabbi Yehuda that as long as Shabbos started, it's fine. And the Rabbi Yitzchak has like Rabbi Yossi, who says, no, you view it exactly as it is now. Is it good or is it no good? So Amalach Rav Huna, Ana Damrinan, Afilu Rabbi Yossi. So Rav Huna could say no. Even Rabbi Yossi really agrees with me. Ad kan lo kamar Rabbi Yossi hatam ela delitnu mechitza. When Rabbi Yossi said that case that's where there aren't any walls whatsoever. Haka itnu lemechitzas. But here, right, part of there's a breach on both sides, but there's still most of the wall still there, so therefore he would agree with my opinion that it would still be kosher. Rabbi Yitzchak could say, Ana da'amri afilu Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yitzchak would say, so for me, it might be even called Rabbi Yehuda, because why? Ad kan lo kamar Rabbi Yehuda hatam ela de'itnu diurit. Rabbi Yehuda only stated his opinion when there's actually people living in the area. Haka litnu diurin. Right, so then we'd say that it would remain kosher, but only if the people are still there. If there's nobody there, then that means that would not work. So which one is it? So right, so the answer is that really we can't necessarily parallel one argument with the other argument. So now we're back to our Mishnah about the vertical and the horizontal use of the poles and of the end of the ropes. So so you could use either vertical or horizontal. Hainu Tanakama. It's not the same thing as the Tanakama stated. So what did they add? So Ikabenayu Yachid Vishu. No, there is a difference if you're the only person living there. So since the Tanakama was only talking about the case of a shayara, you're saying even in a shayara it would be fine, even without a shayara, right? Because when we read the Mishnah, it sounded like the whole thing was talking about in the case of an encampment. And they're saying no, it's not the case. Okay, now we're on to the next Mishnah. This is the last Mishnah of our parak, and we'll hopefully be finishing the parak today as well. Okay, so now we're talking about there are four special things that you're exempt from when you are living in a camp. So in a military camp, right? So there's a whole for more on this there's a lot of interesting things about the way things happen in a military camp, which we will. So if you want, interesting place to look for this is Rama Milcham Malachim, where he starts talking about ways of running a state and has a little bit about military affairs there. There's also a lot of modern books that talk about this to a far greater extent. But this is one of the places where in the Mishnah Gemara, it comes up bits and pieces here, bits and pieces there, where it explains about things that are different about being in a military encampment. Okay, so now what are they? So Mavin Eitzim Mikol Makom. So you're allowed to take wood from anywhere. They don't have to wash their hands before eating. Umidmai, and from dmai, which is produce, which is unclear if it had its trumos suffix, its trumos masrut were taken. Umil arev, and they also don't have to make an eruv. So all these things that seem to be derabanan that the Chachamim said you don't have that don't apply in the encampment. So we will see. And now we're gonna discuss in depth what each of these things are and what we're talking about. So Tanar Rabbanan. Machaneh hayotzeit lemilchama milchamet reshut mutarim begezel eitzim yiveshim. So we have the Tosefta stating that a military encampment going for a milchamet reshut, meaning it's a voluntary war, meaning it's like for a war for conquering land, but not the land of Israel itself, and not not a war that is directly commanded by God.
Rabbi,
yes,
I just wanted to point out that this week's parsha is Kitetze.
Correct.
It's quite apropos.
Right. So, and you see, Kitetze also there is a difference between the right in terms of wars between the degree of restraint we have when we're in voluntary wars versus the meaning we'll allow them to surrender, whereas where that option doesn't exist. So within conquering the Shiva Amim, the 7 Canaanite nations, that's not an option. So okay, so what are you allowed to do in Milchamet Reshus? You're allowed to take whatever dry wood you find. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema Omer, Af Chonim B'chol Makom. In addition to that, you're also allowed to camp anywhere you want. Unlike some countries nowadays have laws that no soldiers aren't allowed to quarter. So that's not the case for halakha for wars. You can basically pick any place you want to set up your camp. Doesn't matter who's there at the moment. And also, if somebody passes away in one of these wars, they are entitled to be buried where they fall. And whoever happens to own the plot of land, they can't protest because the person passed away there. That's where they get buried. Okay. So now we're going to analyze each part of this Tosefta. Mutarim begezel eitzim evasion. So you're allowed to steal the dry wood. So they're permitted to. Are they really permitted to? To steal dry wood? So they say, yeah, this is the kind of that Yeshua made in the first 100 designs of Israel. Da'amar mar asarim shnaim hitna Yeshua as we said elsewhere, that there's a certain takana that were instituted by Yeshua. So now this is a partial list. So partial zones of Shumari and Bacharashim that they're allowed to that anybody is allowed to graze their animals in the woods, which belongs to somebody else without them protesting. They're also allowed to pick up wood. They're allowed to gather wood for his own use from other people's fields. So then who needs to say there's anything special with an encampment? This is a general rule for anybody living in the land of Israel. Why are you saying this is a specific thing for when you're at war? So Hatam b'hizmi v'higi. So why? Because what's the difference there is that Yeshua's takana only applied to shrubs and thorns, meaning the far less usable of the woods. But here, when you're at war, even the military one, you're allowed to take any wood, not just the wood that you can never build a house out of shrubs and thorns, but you can make a fire. They say no, any wood. That's the difference when you're at war. Inami, or you could say another option, Hatum Mechubarin, Hakab Exclusion. Right? So Yeshua said you're allowed to gather the thorns that are still currently attached. But here, we're talking about the ones that are even removed. So, meaning when you're pulling out the thorns and the shrubs, right? So, people's fields they're basically weeds, right? So you're helping the guy. So for those you're allowed to take, let's say the ones that are already separated, that might be more beneficial, and like maybe the guy himself could use it for firewood. You should be able to take. And that's the difference between the two. Inami hatam balachin hakam. Or maybe they're saying that when you're allowed to take it, when they're still wet. That's what Yeshua allowed, because that's very far from being usable for the landowner. But here, or even the dry ones, which the owner of the land could use immediately. So I think even those you're allowed to take. So the question basically is to what extent you're allowed to, how expansive it is in one case versus the other case, and what are you allowed to do with that be actually considered to be stealing something. Okay. So now we're going to keep addressing other elements of the war camp. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema Omer. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, Av chonim b'chol makom. So he says you're allowed to park, you're allowed to camp wherever you'd like. Makom shenharagin sham nikbarin, and wherever they pass away, that's where they get buried. So now we're going to ask about these 2 points. So primarily the last one. Shita, Beit mitzvah. So this is obvious. This is a Beit mitzvah. So why would that even be a question? A Beit mitzvah is always going to the land, where he is. A Beit mitzvah kon v'komo, and a Beit mitzvah is buys where he is. Lo tzvicha, rather it's needed. Why? Because afal gav to eat like kovrin. It's saying this is a case where person has somebody who, the person who passed away in the war, he has somebody who take care of it. The Tanya, right? So the Tanya is a mitzvah. So as we stated, what is a mitzvah? Whoever doesn't have anybody to bury them. So when we're saying that that somebody is a mitzvah, it's not that it's a very specific case. It's where somebody has nobody to take care of them. It's not so. Right, so we have thought that mitzvah is only for, let's say, we may thought otherwise, is that they're saying that even though this doesn't fit the normal category of mitzvah, it still is fine. So, the question you may thought this is like, let's say, so what do we mean when you say that nobody is going to take care of him? So, korei v'acherim Onomoto ends up mitzvah. So how would you know whether or not this is the case? Sorry. So how would you know that whether or not this is truly a mitzvah or not? So normally you'd say you try and ask around, call out loudly. Does anybody know who this person is? Is there anybody who can take care of him? And then if you were met with silence, so if somebody can answer, then it's not a mitzvah because that means that somebody else can take care of it. Because somebody is around, but if there's nobody else there, then it falls onto you. So the area of what is considered to be a mitzvah is rather relatively limited. That's what we're operating with. So now we're going to keep discussing the halachot of a mitzvah. Okay, okay. So mitzvah kana makomo, and does a mitzvah really acquire the place where he passed away? Hatanya hamotzi meit mutal b'sratya. Fanayu lemin esratya olis small esratya. So who's to say that he always gets the place where he passed away and is found? And it's on Beit that somebody finds a dead body on a major highway. That's a sratya, right? So v'nayel yamin sratya or small sratya. He moves him to the right or left of the street, but you don't bury him on the actual street itself. You move him. So, right, and now we're gonna give right. So let's say now it's removing him. So stay bor, who stay near. Let's say you've got a. Let me see if there's a diagrams of this. Okay, let me sorry. Let me reshare my screen. There are diagrams of this one. Okay, everybody sees here. This is where there are multiple here. So basically, we started off with the, we have the main road, right? Right. This is the main highway. So he passes away on it. Oftentimes, so we're supposed to bury him. We're supposed to bury him on the road. No, you're supposed to him to the side. So now we're like, okay, wait. So now that we decided that we're not burying him in the middle of the road, we're going to bury him off to the side of the road. How are we going to do that? Go to the right or the left? So what's located on the right? So stay bor, stay near. So on one side we have a uncultivated field, and on one side we have a plowed field. I mean, the person's currently using it. But when I stay bor, you should move him to the uncultivated field. Stay near or stay there. If you have a plowed field and a sown field, stay near. If you have a choice between a fully sown field versus one that's basically it's plowed but not fully done yet, you do it to the one that's just plowed but not yet fully planted and grown in. So higher stem nirot. Let's say both of them were the same, the right and left. Stem nirot, stem zerot, stem burot. Both of them were simply plowed. Both of them were fully seeded. Both of them were completely uncultivated. Then you can put them to either side. So this whole, the point of this bring this whole statement here is to say that you actually don't get precisely where you are, where the person's best away is. He gets a region very close by, but he doesn't get that exact location. At least not every case. So therefore, it turns out that either mitzvah can be moved. So Amar Bibi, Hago made mutal al Metzger. Right. So what's the case where you'd say you'd be able to get the right? So what's the case? Instead, it's that where the dead body is on the side of it. Right. So basically here. So the difference between whether or not the way the body is laid out in such a way that if you were to let's say it's not the longest road, it's only about as long as a person. So therefore, if you bury the person exactly where he's sitting right now, you've got a problem because now the whole road is going to be his. There'll be a dead body in the road. Why is there a dead body road problem? The problem is because a Kohen can't cross over this road now. So that's a real problem. It's also create major headaches for when people are keeping too much Torah. Not just a Kohen can't cross over the road, but it also mean that basically anybody who's tahor would then become tameh, and they wouldn't necessarily notice that. That would be pretty bad. So since he's in an area which will end up ostering the area for many other people's usage, that's why we allow the moving of the mitzvah. But if not for that, then he would have been acquired where he passed away. So therefore, right, he really does acquire so the answer is he really does acquire. There's one case where he doesn't. So now, okay. So now the next statement we'd had in the Mishnah, right? And now they are patur from washing their hands. Now, what do you mean by that? So Amar Abai, lo shanu elamayim rishon, v'lam achronim chova. So Abai says they're only talking about washing your hands before you eat. Let's say before you eat bread, or back in the time of Midrash before you would eat fruits and vegetables as well. But for my machronim, is a chova, it's a requirement. When you wash your hands after you eat, and before you bench, that's a requirement. You have to. So Amar Rechia bar Ravashi, Mipnema Amar Mai Makornim Chova. So now Rechia bar Ravashi asks, so why do we state that Mai Makornim is considered to be a requirement? Mipnei Shemelach Somet Yesh, Shemisamet Tenaim, because there is something called sodomite salt, and if you were to get it in your eyes, it'll blind you. So that's why you have to Mai Makornim. So, Amar Baye, Umishtaka Kakurta Bekhura. And what is the amount that we're worried about of Maltadomit? We're worried about even if you have the proportion of a single grain in an entire core of other salt. Meaning, so that's remember like a BAYT. So it's basically it's 1 grain out of a bushel, so it's a very small proportion. So Amrle Ravacha Bre de Rava Ravashi Kyle Milcha Mai. So then Ravacha, the son of Rava, said Ravashi, what if you measured out the amount of salt? Right? And you weren't eating, you still need to wash your hands. So Amrle Lama Baye. It's unnecessary to say this because obviously if you've been putting your hands in salt, let's say your job is to measure out salt and give it to people. Let's say you worked in a store and that's you have the giant container of salt. Somebody comes in and is buying, a little bit, so you measure some out for him. So of course then you'd have to wash your hands because that's even more so because there's way more salt there than there is elsewhere. So there's a question nowadays of Lachmasa, are you supposed to do my Machonim? So that's a subject to great debate. So as for the so then some say that you really should, and some say that that's largely based on when you're actually eating with your hands, as opposed to when you're eating with utensils, because then the odds of you actually getting your hands dirty and getting any salt in your eyes is far less. But in any event, if your hands are actually dirty in the meal, whether or not you've had salt or anywhere near there, you should still wash your hands. For more on this, we could address that another time, or ask me afterwards. Okay, Midmai. So they're also put there from Demai when they're in the military camp. So, as it's stated in the Mishnah, Machilat Tanin Demai v'Tafsanai Demai. Stated in the Mishnah, you can feed 4 people Demai and also to your guests Demai. So Amar Ravuna Tan Bet Shammai Omrim Emachim Tanim Demai v'Tafsanai Demai. So then we have Beit Shammai says, but you can't feed Demai to 4 people or to your guests. And on the other hand, we have Beit says you can. Because again, this isn't like necessarily feeding them so again, a little bit of Demai. Demai isn't that it's actually usser. Demai is basically in the time of Beit Sheni, there was and to the time of Tanaim, there were people in living in Israel. Not everybody was so scribes. There were people also called Amei Haaretz, who were, some would translate them as, like the average person, but there were people who weren't necessarily as scrupulous as others. And so if somebody was going to buy from these Amei Haaretz, those people who weren't necessarily as scrupulous. You weren't sure.
Excuse me, Rabbi. I'm losing the connection.
Is anyone else having issues? Or
seems okay.
Okay.
Sorry,
okay.
Joe.
Okay.
Okay, so it's me. Okay, I'm sorry.
All good. So, right. So again, Demai isn't really usher. It's just the case is basically they weren't sure if they were properly separating out Trumot and Masrot. So that the Rabbanim they said that's this category of Demai. But they said, but really, and the reason why why poor people allowed to have it as well as you can fit your guys is because really, well, they almost always will be separating out truma, which is the thing that which would make it usher with the chiyuv, right? So since that's out the window, so that's for sure out the window. And also, yeah, they probably most of them, a decent portion of them probably also do separate the rest of Masrot as well. So that's why we're making it there because it's not a true suffix. It's somewhere in between. For more on that, see Hilchot Demai. And we should have it to mind for more session of that. So umila reif, and they're putter from making an erub. So Amri debate Rabbi Yanai. So they said, so this is statement from the school of Rabbi Yanai. Lo shanu ella eruv chatzerot. They're only putter for making an eruv chatzerot, meaning to allow that if let's say you're surrounded by walls, normally you're going to make an eruv chatzerot to allow everybody located within to carry in that region. Although eretz chumin chayavin, but they would be chayav to make an eretz chumin if they wanted to walk to change their center of living from being where their encampment is to being somewhere else. Then they would have to set up an eretz chumin for that purpose. Tanar b'chia lokin al eretz chumin dvar Torah. So why is that the case? So Rabbi Chia says because eretz chumin is d'oraita. So therefore that's why right means so to me that everything in the Mishnah is Rabbanan, and so therefore that's why you get out of Erev Chatzerot because Erev Chatzerot and the whole issue of Ervuin for stop purposes is all Rabbanan, but Tchumin is actually D'oraita, so since Tchumin is D'oraita, therefore that wouldn't apply. So the Makivla Rabbi Yonatan, Chilokan Alav Shabal, and then Rabbi Yonatan asks, wait, can you really be looking for a law which simply says like I'd say ish bimkomo, right? Is that really that from that pasuk is that really sufficient to make you get malko? So Makivla Ravacha Bar Yaakov. And so then Ravacha Bar Yaakov asks, Elamata, rather you learn that from here. Al tibnul avot vayidunim hakanami b'lalaki. So you're saying that you wouldn't get you say that all is insufficient to give you malchut, and what about if somebody was violated the magic of Ov, the magic of Yidoni, right? Meaning the ghosts or of the different types of Ov is the one who speaking out of the ark, speaking out of bones. So right, different types of magic. So so you do not get malchut for that. So Rabbi Yonatan Hakikashali. Now here's what the real problem was. Lav shnitan lazhar midat beis. If there's a lav, but you will also end up there's also a capital offense that basically can kill you for. V'chol lav shnitan lazhar midat beitin ein lokin a lav. And in any place where there's a lav, but if you were to violate it with proper hatra and edim, with proper warning and witnesses, then you would be put to death. That would mean that if you were to have done the item, if you have done the isser, then the violated the lav without having those things, you would not get malchut for that. So Amar Rashi. So now Rashi is asking on this. Miktiv al yotzi. Wait. Is it really? So he says when we're talking about the pasuk that we're learning from, right? So what is that? What does the pasuk say? It doesn't say al yotzi. Al yotzi. Instead of saying al yotzi that you shouldn't carry, instead it says you shall not go out. So that would mean that which is asur midaraita and which is asur midarabanan. So from here it seems like it's asur midaraita to do. Asur for tchumin, but hotzah is only asur midrabanan. So, okay, so now and hadron alav mavoy. Okay, so we finish the pack. So I'm going to summarize, and then I'm going to give a little bit on the question of is erev d'oraita or d'rabanan. So we got to summarize what we've been talking about for the past stuff. We spoke a little bit about the case of the maximum area that's allowed to be enclosed by the walls of your eruv, and we concluded then in the end that it's up to for individuals up to BAYT satayim, and then it scales up based on the amount that you need. Just make sure you don't leave a gap of BAYT satayim. And we'll also discuss the case of military encampment and how your punters returned in the Rabbanan. How your punter from Gedel Midrabanan on wood, about washing your hands before you eat, about having to worry about demise. You bought produce from Am Haaretz, and about worrying about having to make an Erev Chatzerot when you are encamped. So, question of is now to the question of is Ervuin D'Oraita or Midrabanan. So that's subject to a let's see, one second. Let me pull that. Here we go. Okay, so let me share a different screen. So you can hear my notes from this is the notes when I was going over from when I was learning Ervuin last year. Again, for a full treatment of this, I'll hopefully have an article coming out, and when it is available, I will be sending to everybody. So here we go. So the question of is it D'Oraita? So there's a couple of cases that support it being D'Oraita. One is the Gemara in Sota about Arei Levim. Another one is the Gemara Yerushalmi, which we mentioned on the first day about based on Machane Yisrael, based on the way that the Jews camped in the desert. Therefore, it also seemed like it's D'Oraita. And then there's the hybrid sheet that there's part there D'Oraita and D'Rabbanan. That means that Yud Beis meal is D'Oraita, and that there's 1,000 amot that we're going to be talking about a lot in terms of Zichron is right. So again, this is just for Zichron for Ervuin. Right, so that appears I know it's one of the malachot. So either way, this also would be D'Oraita, whether or not it's got a separate legal. Okay, we're not talking about just about Zichron, right? The question, is it us from D'Oraita? So these are all the supports for saying that why it is. So there's our Gemara which we just quoted that you get malchot D'Oraita. There's also the Gemara on Daf Nalef we'll get to in a couple of weeks. That there's Xer Shabbat teachings about Alpine Amma, which would imply that even the Alpine Amma of Zichron is Midoraita. There's also the Gemara in Sota, where we have Rabbi Akiva learns it out based on the Arei Leviim, that just like the Leviim have 2,000 Amma surrounding their cities, therefore we have 2,000 Amma for Zichron. And we also have the Gemara in Shabbos that says that Zichron may have been commanded to Beit Israel at Mara, which would imply when we first got mitzvot of the Torah. So that would imply that it's Midoraita. Another option is for why we think that everything is D'Rabbanan, which is the other side, which is not what this Gemara is a very strong support for why I think it's D'Oraita. And compare why Eretz Zichron is supposed to Eretz Chatzerot, very strong support why it's D'Oraita. But it might be D'Rabbanan. So that we learn out from So when we have the machloket between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim in Sota. So when you have Rabbi Akiva who says it's D'Oraita and the Chachamim saying it's D'Rabbanan, normally you'd paskin like D'Rabbanan. So that's why you'd think that Zichron is Midrabbanan. And then we have the question of and there's also a Gemara in Beit Daf Lamed Bet which says Lo Samchu Gzera L'Kol Gav Behema Ela Al Tashash. Right. So basically, there it's a question of it's usher to ride an animal on Shabbos, and why is it usher to ride an animal on Shabbos? So initially, they tried to make it usher because of Zichron, but then they said no because of Ein Osim Gzera L'Gzera, which would imply, which means that the problem is that Zichron is really D'Rabbanan, and that's why you can't make an Gzera against horse riding because of Zichron, because Zichron is D'Rabbanan. So, and at the end of the day, who says what? So at the end of the day, we've got a lot of big hitters on each side. So we've got saying D'Oraita, we've got the Shilto, the Rif, the Rambam, the Ravid, the Ravya, and the Sefer Chinuch. And the people saying D'Rabbanan, we have the Baal HaMaor, the Ramban, the Rashba, the Ritva, and Tosfot. So as far as is Zichron directed to D'Rabbanan, it actually is subject to a lot of discussion. And it has a lot of not being halacha in terms of whether or not you would be allowed to apply certain kulas would affect very differently whether or not with an Isser D'Oraita or an Isser D'Rabbanan. So that is finishes our conclusion of the first parak of Ervuin, and I'm looking forward to keep learning the rest with everybody as well.
Good. Thank you.
So I take it there's no resolution to Raisa or Rabbanan.
There's no true resolution, no.
I gotta go. Thank you very much. Take care. We'll see you tomorrow. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again.
Bye.